As soon as early election results pointed to a clear victory for former President Donald Trump, liberals took to social media to criticize American Muslims, Arabs, and Latinos for not fully supporting Vice President Kamala Harris. Social media posts ranged from calls to deport Muslims and Latinos to wishing for Trump to unleash more destruction on Gaza. This backlash tactlessly showed the dynamics of how white liberals view the role of minorities, especially Muslims and Arabs, in American politics. In a classic display of white savior complex, these communities were blamed for not knowing what's best for them, as though Harris was running altruistically to protect them from the dangers of second Trump presidency. The fact that Harris' presidential campaign centered on countering Trump showed a lack of genuine interest in really tackling issues important to minority groups. Democrats actually benefited from Trump's rise, which presented an opportunity for them to win votes freely by positioning themselves as the only alternative to outright fascism. Yet, instead of looking inward for answers on why Harris lost to a candidate as problematic as Trump, these liberal Democrats chose to reprimand minorities. Signaling a sense of superiority, they could not hide their racism, implying that it was the responsibility upon these minority communities to vote within the guidelines provided to them by liberal saviors. By that logic, Arabs, Muslims, and Latinos must vote for Democrats no matter what. This viewpoint strips minority communities of their rights as equal citizens who can partake in the democratic process independently. While the days of barring black people and women from voting are behind us, this backlash truly brings to mind the same white supremacist logic that non-white people are incapable of voting on their own and require the guidance from their liberal saviors. In the months leading up to the election day, Democrats ignored the cries of Muslims, Arabs, and their allies to at least recognize the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. They arrogantly disregarded warnings about potentially losing the Arab vote in Michigan due to Israel's war on Gaza, despite desperately needing to win the swing state to have any hope of beating Trump. To make matter worse, former President Bill Clinton was sent to Michigan to patronize the Arab community, justifying Israeli crimes in Gaza by saying Israel had to kill civilians in order to defend itself. This attitude towards voters in Michigan stemmed from a racist and Orientalist notion the Arabs and Muslims would eventually fall in line, fearing a Trump's presidency. Blaming Arabs, Muslims, and Latinos for Harris's humiliating defeat highlights the Democrats' sense of entitlement to the votes of those communities. This rage-filled racist attack on social media marked the resulting tantrum of these liberal saviors. Ignoring the real issues that enabled Trump's victory, Democrats instead chose to blame those desperately trying to stop the ongoing mass murder of their loved one in Gaza and Lebanon. Giving nothing in return, these Democrats wanted the grieving masses to forget about the US-enabled genocide overseas in order to defeat Trump domestically. Both Republicans and Democrats view Israel as a strategic partner in maintaining American interests and hegemony in the Middle East. So opposing their unconditional support for Israel is therefore portrayed as a betrayal of American national interests that cannot be tolerated in the political discourse. Despite the lack of major Arab and Muslim endorsements for Harris, the Democratic Party did not entertain any demands of ending the Gaza genocide, asserting instead that the reward for helping Harris get elected would be to prevent another Trump's presidency, thus placing the burden of saving democracy on these suffering communities. The Uncommitted national movement provided a golden opportunity for Democratic establishment to acknowledge the grievances of Arabs and Muslims without even requiring any policy concessions on Israel, especially given how naively loyal the movement proved to be. But the compromises of the Uncommitted movement, which lowered its demand from an arms embargo in Israel to simply allowing a Palestinian American speaker at the Democratic National Convention, were met with rude dismissals. The Democratic Party's refusal to negotiate with the communities affected by the Gaza genocide was not an oversight. It was a calculated decision based on prioritizing other potential influential voters, particularly white anti-Trump Republicans, as represented by Harris' decision to campaign alongside politician Liz Cheney. If Democrats truly valued Arabs and Muslims, rather than seeing them as secured votes in the bag, they would have at the very least found a more empathetic way to dismiss their protests instead of shouting over them, as Harris infamously did, "I'm speaking." There's no doubt that the collective rage among liberals over losing this election to Trump comes from a place of cognitive dissonance influenced by American exceptionalism. How could the US, a beacon of liberal values and justice, elect a racist, misogynistic, xenophobic, convicted felon as its president? Yet, rather than taking this opportunity to examine the many issues within American democracy and society, ranging from structural racism to economic inequality, monstrous Freudian policies, and the malign influence of money and multinational corporations in politics, liberals are taking their frustration out on disfranchised communities. Comments across social media following Trump's victory showcase a serious resentment towards Arab and Muslim causes, especially the genocide in Gaza, displaying how superficial liberal past support for such causes actually was. Liberals are simply refusing to admit Biden's administration's role in losing the Arab and Muslim vote. This fallout puts Arab and Muslim communities at a critical junction in terms of how they view themselves in relation to the US as a state and as an empire. The Gaza genocide has brought back discussions about the role of the US in destroying Arab and Muslim nations and the ethical responsibility of holding it accountable for these crimes. Ultimately, the racism, Orientalism, and the feeling of expendability that the minority communities are experiencing after this election challenges the assumption that they can be integrated and included within American society and its supposed democracy. Is it even possible for Arabs and Muslims to be seen as equal citizens without compromising their social and political principles?